Let me ask you something right now, and I want you to think about this honestly. If someone asked you who the biggest draw in women's tennis is today, who would you say? You'd probably go with Coco Gauff. That makes sense. She's a Grand Slam champion. She's the American Golden Girl. Brands love her, broadcasters love her, and she has the kind of story that practically writes itself, a childhood prodigy who grew up and actually delivered. Maybe you'd say Aryna Sabalenka. Totally fair. She's the world number one. When that woman wins up for a serve, the entire stadium holds its breath. She's dominant, she's charismatic, and she has a global following that any athlete would kill for. You might even go with Iga Swiatek, the tactical genius who's had a stranglehold on the WTA rankings for what feels like forever. These are legitimate answers. These are the faces tournament directors dream about, the athletes on the big billboards outside Flushing Meadows, the names that carry million-dollar sponsorship deals. But here's where things get really interesting. Because according to some of the most respected voices in professional tennis, none of them is the biggest draw in the sport right now. The player causing complete pandemonium in stadiums around the world, the one tournament directors are scrambling to accommodate, the one forcing scheduling changes and logistical nightmares, is a 20-year-old from the Philippines named Alexandra Ela. And no, I'm not exaggerating. Stick with me here, because the numbers alone are going to make your jaw drop. This story broke wide open on February 23, 2026, during episode 151 of the Nothing Major podcast hosted by former ATP pros Steve Johnson, Sam Querrey, and John Isner. These aren't analysts sitting behind a desk. These are guys who spent years on tour. They know what a packed stadium feels like. They know what real star power looks like from the inside. About halfway through the episode, Sam Querrey dropped what I can only describe as a rhetorical grenade. He asked his co-hosts point blank, is Alexandra Ela the biggest draw in women's tennis right now? Is she bigger than Sabalenka? Is she bigger than Coco? Steve Johnson didn't pause. He didn't hedge. He just said, dude, it's crazy. He talked about the Australian Open, where crowds were standing room only every time Ela walked onto a court. He brought up Dubai, same story. He referenced what happened in Miami last year with Brazilian teenager João Fonseca, how his matches got so out of hand they had to physically move them to bigger venues. Then he said Ela's impact is bigger than that. Bigger. His word, not mine. John Isner backed him up, talking about the scenes in Doha the week before. Insane, he said. The crowds were completely insane for her. And then Isner said something that really cuts to the heart of why this is happening. He called the Philippines a huge market, one that tennis had essentially ignored for decades. He said people underestimated just how enormous that potential was. And now, he said, they finally have their star. So how did we get here? Because 12 months ago, most people had never heard of Alexandra Ela. At the start of 2025, she was ranked around 140 in the world, fighting through challenger-level events, scraping for ranking points week by week. She was a teenager with real talent but zero mainstream visibility. Then the Miami Open handed her a wild card. What followed was one of those movie moments that sports occasionally produces when it wants to remind you why you watch in the first place. She beat Elena Ostapenko, the French Open champion, with one of the most destructive forehands on tour. Then she took down Madison Keys. And then, on a hard court in Miami, fueled by a crowd that had completely adopted her, she beat Iga Swiatek. That win didn't just change her ranking. It changed everything. Miami was the spark. After that, the dominoes started falling. She reached her first WTA final on the grass courts of Eastbourne. She won her first main draw Grand Slam match at the US Open, becoming the first Filipino woman in history to do so. She finished 2025 inside the top 50. And then 2026 started, and things got genuinely wild. Let me give you the number that puts all of this in perspective. During a recent tournament, a pre-event press conference featuring Alexandra Ela drew 171,000 live online viewers. 171,000 people watching a press conference. A joint press conference for Carlos Alcaraz and Coco Gauff, two of the biggest names in the entire sport, drew 29,000. Aryna Sabalenka, the world number one, drew 9,000. Ela pulled in nearly 6 times more viewers than Sabalenka. for a press conference. That's not a quirk of the algorithm. That's not a fluke. That is a coordinated, passionate, digitally active fan base doing what Filipino supporters do, showing up, loudly and completely. At the Australian Open this year, she was scheduled to play a first-round match on court 6, a modest outside court, perfectly normal for a player ranked outside the top 30. But thousands of Filipino fans had traveled to Melbourne specifically to watch her. The court couldn't hold them. The walkways jammed. People who'd arrived hours early couldn't get in. The infrastructure of one of the world's biggest tournaments buckled under the weight of her following. Then she went to Doha. Same thing. Then Dubai, where she went on a brilliant run, beating Hailey Baptiste, Jasmine Paolini, and veteran Siniakova to push her ranking to a career high of 31 in the world. And all of that set up a quarterfinal match that the tennis world had been waiting for. Alexandra Eala versus Coco Gauff. On paper, this was a mismatch. Gauff is ranked 4th in the world, a Grand Slam champion, arguably the most complete all-around player on tour right now. Eala, for all her momentum, was still a heavy underdog. But the crowd? The crowd didn't see it that way. In the United Arab Emirates, thousands of miles from the Philippines, the stadium belonged entirely to Eala. Gauff, who's used to playing in front of crowds that adore her, found herself as the villain of the evening. Every error she made was met with quiet satisfaction. Every Eala winner was met with an eruption. Gauff responded to all of it by playing some of the best tennis of her life. She came out focused, targeted Eala's forehand relentlessly, and won the first 10 games of the match consecutively. Final. Clinical, precise, almost ruthless. But here's the moment that really defined the night. In the post-match on-court interview, Gauff took the microphone and looked out at a stadium that had been cheering against her for the past hour. And instead of frustration, instead of even a subtle dig, she said this: "Thank you guys for coming out. I know you're mostly here for Alex, but I have to say it's great to be on a packed court. And I want to thank Alex for bringing a new demographic to this sport. I really appreciate it." When Coco Gauff, one of the most famous athletes on the planet, publicly thanks someone for expanding the audience of her own sport, the conversation is over. This isn't a podcast debate anymore. It's consensus reality. Here's what makes Eala's rise genuinely different from any other breakout story in recent memory. Normally, there's a very clear sequence to becoming a draw in professional tennis. You win a Grand Slam. You crack the top 5. You land the big endorsements. And then the massive crowds follow. The popularity comes after the success. Eala is doing it completely backwards. She's ranked 31st in the world. She hasn't won a slam. She's still, by many measures, a work in progress, still developing her game, still building her results. And yet she is outpacing multiple Grand Slam champions in raw crowd engagement. She's forcing tournament organizers to move her matches to bigger venues based on crowd demand, not ranking. That has essentially never happened before. What's driving it goes deeper than tennis. When Eala steps onto a court in Melbourne, she isn't just playing a tennis match. She's representing the thousands of Filipino nurses, engineers, students, and workers who have built lives in Australia. Buying a ticket to watch her isn't just a sports decision for many of them, it's an act of identity. John Isner called it right. Tennis has been leaving a massive market almost entirely untouched for decades. The Philippines has over 115 million people domestically and millions more scattered across the globe, a diaspora renowned for its intense national pride and its habit of showing up for its own. We've seen what happens when a Filipino athlete captures that energy on a world stage. Manny Pacquiao didn't just become a boxing champion, he became a national religion. Eala is tapping into that exact same current. The difference is she's doing it on the manicured grass and hard courts of the WTA Tour, in a sport that has historically struggled to crack Southeast Asia. She cracked it. Almost overnight. Aryna Sabalenka commands respect. Coco Gauff inspires admiration. Both of them will fill a stadium. But Alexandra Ela mobilizes an army. And in 2026, that distinction matters more than almost anything else in professional sports. Steve Johnson said she's an absolute rock star. Looking at what's actually happening in the stands, on the screens, and in the logistical headaches of tournament directors from Melbourne to Dubai, it's hard to argue with him. She hasn't won a Grand Slam yet. She's not world number one. She's still finding her ceiling. But right now, today, she might just be the most compelling reason to buy a ticket in women's tennis.